I'm happy to introduce Sriram, who I've known for a number of years now. He used to be a professor at Georgia Perimeter College north of Atlanta. And we worked together on civic engagement related things, and then he decided to quit a job to go back and do his PhD in political science. So he's at UC Santa Barbara, finishing up his PhD, and is going to be looking for a job pretty soon as a professor, probably. But I thought the research that he's doing is really interesting, really timely, related to some of the things that we're talking about in the United States and here in Houston. His specialty is on voting behavior, political socialization, and refugees. So with that, let's welcome Shyam to Lone Star College-Kingwood.
Thank you. It's been an epic day for two reasons. One, this is the fourth talk I've given today. He's driven 200 miles, but today alone I've spoken at UP, what is it, Tomball, Sci-Fair, and now this. And then tomorrow I'm speaking at Montgomery. So I'm hitting all the bases. So, but this is good. I like teaching, I miss it, so I'm happy to be here. So as he said, my name is Shyam, and I'm here to present something that is part of my dissertation. So those of you who are familiar with people who have PhDs or who have heard about the dissertation process, a dissertation is supposed to be a book-length manuscript. So this is like everything that you want to put into this project. So I can't present my dissertation because it's at this point like over 100 pages long. Right, so I'm providing like a snippet from that, and it's a work in progress, and it'll be done by next year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and all this stuff, but what I'm here really today is to kind of to challenge you and to think about probably one of the most debated topics in America, which is first, why people don't participate in the Republic. That's the bigger question. And secondly, why is it that college students, right, particularly, are not participating at the levels that people expect. Okay, so there's a prevailing logic into the 1970s after when the voting age was dropped from 21 to 18. The belief really was like, we're giving people the opportunity to participate, so young people in some ways should participate more. But what we see over the years is that's not the case. People between the ages of 18 and 24 are often the least likely to participate in the United States. And I think part of this puzzle for me is, especially now in an age of technology, why is that still so? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm also going to be talking about the relationship between patriotism and participation. And this is important because, again, we live in almost a hyper-patriotic society now in the United States, and we're going to talk about what that means. And the third part of this is what I'm going to argue, and you guys are going to see in my kind of theory, is that I think the reason why people, even who have high levels of patriotism, don't participate is because they face discrimination. And then the question is, how do you measure that? So I'm going to kind of walk it. So today, I'm going to not get into the statistics side of it and talk about coefficients, regression, R-squared, t-test. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. Today is going to be more kind of unpacking what these are and how would you measure them on surveys, because that's what I've started to do. Feel free to ask me any questions about anything, notwithstanding President Trump's press conference today, which I'm still trying to figure out, but we can try to get into it if you want. Okay, do you guys know what I'm talking about? He had an epic press conference today for 1 hour and 15 minutes. He had a long press conference today. Okay, so, all right. So let's talk about myself, my background a little bit. So this is me with both my grandmothers, who are like 86, 87. I just went to India. I was there a month ago. And I'm very blessed. I'm 37 years old, and I still have 3 grandparents. So my niece has 3 great-grandparents. My parents immigrated from India to the US in the 1970s. I'm the first person in my family born in America. I grew up in Chicago, but then a very unique immigrant story, which is that in 1989, my parents decided to move my sister and I back to India so that we would get to know our family, we would learn our language, which is called Tamil, that we would become, we would be part of that community again. So I lived in India till I graduated high school, And then I came back to the US for college. I went to Purdue in Indiana. Then I moved to Georgia. I went to Georgia State, got my master's, then taught community college there, taught high school for a year, and then moved to California in 2014. So I speak Tamil pretty well. I'm also learning Nepali to work with Nepali refugees. This is a more complicated topic. Can anyone here read Hindi or Nepali? So this says Kasto Ramayalo, which means how nice or how pleasant. And we can talk about later. You can ask me why I got into Nepali. I'm happy to talk about it. Okay, so let's start with the background. The conventional thinking about participation is that it is the result of several variables. So some of you, what does the word dependent variable mean? Those of you who have taken American government or...
It's affected by something else.
Yeah, so the dependent variable is the thing you're trying to measure. So my dependent variable is participation, right? And the independent variables that are usually used to determine participation are these, which is education, age, income, socioeconomic status, mobilization, resources, political efficacy. So the argument is that people who are more educated, more or older, have a higher income, are mobilized, which means that someone has done the work of getting them to participate, and who have efficacy. Efficacy is what? Can somebody define political efficacy for me?
Believe that you can't change, you can't affect the change.
You are the only student to get it right today. Congratulations. So, political efficacy is the belief that you can influence government, that government will change with your work into it. So, for all of these reasons, college students are not expected to participate because they don't have the education, they don't have this, they don't have that, they're not mobilized as much. And of course, this matters because we live in a republic, right? I'm using Republican lowercase r to determine that we're talking about a country built on a representative democracy. Okay, can someone else raise their hand and tell me what is the origin of the word democracy? What language is the word democracy derived from, and what is the origin to, it's two words that we derive the word democracy from. Does anyone want to guess? It's not Nepali. I'll tell you that. Anyone?
I know it's Greek,
It's Greek, right?
but I don't know the words. I don't know the two words.
Okay, so demo or demos, right? You heard the word demographics, right? So demos is people, and krasi is rule. So democracy basically means rule by the people. Okay, and in America we have a representative democracy or a republic, right? We have to participate for the government to run. Unlike some countries which are ruled by a monarchy or a religious ruler, we don't have this here in the US. Okay, but here's where I'm going to start pushing back at the conventional thinking, right? The first argument is, how do we measure participation? And the reason why this is important is because most people measure participation by voting. Right? They're always looking at voting. And voting is what they say is like when people say Americans don't participate, they're thinking about voting. Right? Now, Americans do vote at higher numbers during primaries than general election, but still the general election voting turnout is very poor. If you look at the list of countries by voter turnout, I'm pretty sure the US among democracies is like 20th in terms of participation. Now, there's reasons for that. Right? For example, Australia has the highest voter turnout in the world, I think. Does anybody know why?
They have to vote.
You have to vote. If you don't vote, you're fined. So then the argument is, are people really participating because they want to, or are they doing it to avoid a fine? Some countries like Italy, amazing. Does anyone know what they do in Italy to encourage people to vote? They publish the names in the local newspapers of people who didn't vote. And it's kind of that mob mentality, and you don't want to see your name in the paper, and then people knocking on your door like, what the hell, why didn't you vote? You're like, I don't know, I was too busy on my Xbox. I know, like, whatever, like, it's some reason. Okay, can you guys see this? Yes. It's a little bit light, because I did it on a black PowerPoint, so maybe a little hard to see. But, yeah, okay. Now, second question, and I'm really fascinated with this one, is what is the role that patriotism plays in improving participation? And the reason I'm asking that is for two reasons. One, as I mentioned before, we do live in this kind of a hyper-patriotic American society now. Like, for example, when I flew in last night, I was driving back to my hotel, and I saw this sign which said Budweiser. No, what is it? Budweiser for those who drink their freedom, or the drink of freedom, or the beer of freedom. I don't even know what this means. Or for example, I just saw a trailer for a movie I'm not going to watch, which is Baywatch, with The Rock and Zac Efron and Priyanka Chopra, who's in Quantico. Some of you have probably seen that. But there's a scene where like Zac Efron is wearing like Speedos, and then The Rock is like, "What are you wearing?" And he's like, "I'm wearing freedom." You know, so it's this kind of like almost abused concept now, right? But here's what I'm really interested in, right? Can you be patriotic and still not want to participate? Okay? And I think this is important because one of the arguments that's come up in the last year, especially I think the effect, what I would call the Bernie Sanders effect in some ways, is that it is not unpatriotic to dissent. But a lot of people have this belief that if you disagree with the government, if you go against the government's wishes, if you call the government out, that somehow makes you less patriotic. And I'm asking people to kind of challenge the thinking on that. And we'll talk about it more. And then the last piece, right? This is my argument. Is there something else going on, right? So again, we would expect that people who have high levels of patriotism would participate more. But that's not true across the board. In my initial kind of analysis, some groups, yes, for sure, but there are some groups of people, especially immigrant refugees, who do not participate as much as others, right? So I'm trying to figure out what is that missing piece. And the missing piece, in my opinion, my theory, is discrimination, right? And again, I'm going to show you how I measure discrimination, right? When I say discrimination, I'm not talking about someone told me something that hurt my feelings, and that because of that, I'm not going to participate. I'm talking about like systematic, everyday discrimination, which is, and I'm going to show you how I measured it, but imagine in a situation where every day or a couple times a month or maybe a few times a year, you are made to feel like you don't belong, or you are threatened, or someone follows you at a mall because they think you're going to shoplift, right? Like how that over time makes you feel like you don't belong in the society. And if you feel like you don't belong, you're not going to want to participate. Right? That's the argument I'm making. Even if you love America and you're a citizen or you're a naturalized citizen, your patriotism is high, if you are experiencing discrimination, you're not going to want to participate. So what I'm going to work on today with you guys is, today I'm just going to kind of unpack how I'm measuring these three things, okay? How I'm measuring discrimination, how I'm measuring patriotism, how I'm measuring participation, and then perhaps if I come back next year and I don't mind coming back and giving a follow-up, after I finish all my data collection, I would love to kind of talk about the next step, is how they all, did I find the connections I'm expecting, or is there something else going on, right? Now the big picture, this is where the thing, so the first I mentioned, right? Discrimination mediate the effect of high patriotism on participation. But I'm really interested in how participation varies between US born and foreign born. And here's a question for you, and I would love to get your opinion on this one. Why do you think someone who is 20 years old, who is going to college at Lone Star Kingwood, who came to the US from another country as a kid, why do you think that person would possibly be less likely to participate than someone who grew up in the US? Like let's say you come from at age 10 from another country, you go to high school here. Like you've lived in the US, but why would that person not participate as much then as someone who grew up in the US? Yes, sir.
Well, their formative years were not in the United States.
But what if their formative years were? What if they came here at 10? So they were here from 10 to 20, right? You still think that the people, they're still old enough that they're bringing stuff over? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Their parents don't help them out with, like knowing how to.
Okay, that's a good one, right? Yours is good too. He said formative years. Their formative years are spent in another country. She said that parents are not really kind of helping with their political education, right? That may also be because of English, right, as well. What else do you think is going on? I'm going to ask, here's another way to think about it. Is it possible that someone who lives in another country is also being influenced by their experiences with government in that country, and that even when they come to the US, they can't seem to separate what they experienced when they were a kid from what they experience now? And what I mean by that is, building off what you said, is what happens if you've experienced discrimination with government in your home country, okay? Then you are going to be less likely to want to participate here because maybe you view the political system here as not open to your participation, right? What if you come from a country where voting is not common? And even though you have the opportunity to vote in America, in your mind, it's kind of like, I don't know if I want to vote. Okay, I'll give you another example. I was working with some refugees from Bhutan. Has anyone ever heard of Bhutan? Where is it? What continent? Asia. Yes, correct. It is near India. It is near Nepal, kind of northeast of India. And I was interviewing some people, and I asked them, when you have problems in your community, do you call the police? And they said no. Okay. Now, again, my thought was they weren't calling the police because maybe they had been hearing things in the news about police and law enforcement or whatever. The reason they don't call the police is because in Bhutan, you can't even look a police officer in the eye because they consider to have so much respect in the society. Like, if you see a police officer on the road, you have to look down. If you look at them in the eye, you're kind of challenging their authority, and then you can be arrested. So if you grew up in that environment, even if you left when you were 2 or 3 years old, your parents are still telling you stories, right? About what it was like, why we left, we couldn't vote, we couldn't do whatever. So you are socialized then to believe that maybe your voice doesn't matter. And then therefore you are less likely to want to participate in the US. Do you understand what I'm saying? That there's this concept of political socialization. So the children of immigrants often struggle with learning about American politics, and maybe some of you have experienced this in your own homes, where you can't really talk about American politics because there's no one to talk about American politics with. Your parents, there's not enough, or maybe at your home, English is not the major language. Maybe it's something else, and because it's something else, the TV is always on something in that language. A lot of complicated things happen that I think sometimes we forget. The other thing I'm interested about is the differences between what we call first, 1.5, and second generation. Can someone else raise their hand and tell me what I mean by first, 1.5, and second generation? What makes someone first generation? Or first generation American, let's say that. So you said first in their family to be born in America. Okay, anyone else, is that what you said?
Yes, born
Okay,
here.
anyone else want to disagree with that? Okay, so first generation traditionally means the first person in the family to come to America. So my parents are considered first generation because they were the first people to come to America from their family. I am actually considered second generation because I was born here to immigrant parents. Now, I'm the first American in my family, and my parents actually became citizens after I did because they were naturalized in the 80s. But it's actually second generation. And then 1.5 is people who come to America under the age of 18, right? So they are socialized into American culture as children, but this is the demographic I'm really most interested in, right? Because this is the demographic that is either in college or is about to go into college. And you could argue this is the demographic that we are expecting to participate more in the future, okay? And then the last question, I guess, the big picture is, how do students experience discrimination and understand patriotism differently, right? And these are the big topics, right? Because again, discrimination and patriotism are individual experiences. And what I'm trying to unpack in this project is, for example, do Muslims experience discrimination differently compared to Hindus? Not just because of our current political climate. Do people from immigrant families experience discrimination like or patriotism? What does patriotism mean? Jay and I were just talking about this. What does patriotism mean to someone who's atheist? Right? Because one of the arguments often associated with Christianity in the US is that there's this relationship often, like a lot of churches, like often have political messaging, right? But what happens if you even don't belong to a religious group at all? Where do you learn your political cues from? So there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to unpack in the dissertation, but this is like the beginning. So what I did was, right now I've got a survey going at UC Santa Barbara, and I've started a survey in Georgia where I used to teach, and I'm doing online surveys in both states, and I've got data coming in daily through SurveyMonkey. It's very low tech, right? And the goal is I'm going to have all this data, and then in May or June, I'm going to go to Atlanta and do interviews with students there. Now, you might be asking, why Georgia? Why not Texas? You're right, why not Texas? But the reason I'm doing it in Georgia is because the college I used to teach at is Georgia Perimeter College, Clarkston. Is here anyone here familiar with Atlanta? No one here has ever been to Atlanta. All right, I'm just saying College Football Hall of Fame is now there. All right, so east of Atlanta is the city called Clarkston. What makes Clarkston so unique is where I used to teach, is all refugees are resettled there when they first move there to Georgia. So it is incredibly diverse, right? It's like, I think 55% of the people speak a language other than English at home. Actually, it's more than that. 55% are foreign born. There are students from like 50 to 60 countries at this campus. I mean, it's really, really diverse. In fact, the town of Clarkston has been revitalized because of refugees, buying up local businesses. It's a fascinating study, okay? So that's where we are so far. So right now I've got a study going, and the data is coming in, but this is the first part of the data. So my sample is very small at this moment. It's only about 91 students. But since I even started doing this presentation, I'm now up to like 140 students. So it's coming in, and my goal is within the next month or so, I'll have probably about 500 to 600 students will be the sample, and then I'll do the interviews, right? Just to get some broad ideas about themes. So a couple of things. So right now, for some reason, women seem to love taking the survey and not men. I think it's because of my personality or so. I don't know, I'm just kidding. I don't know what it is, but men don't want to take the survey for some reason. So 75% of my respondents are women. 37% white, 25% Asian, 14% black, and then smaller numbers of Latinos and other groups, okay? My particular campus is a Hispanic serving institution. That's the official designation. But I don't know, for whatever reason, the number of Latinos who have taken the survey is very small so far. Now, what I'm actually doing is I'm sending the survey on purpose to student groups that have more minority students, immigrant students. So what has happened is I've reached out to several Latino student organizations, of which there are many on my campus, and I'm hoping I get some more data. But this, again, this is why this is why public opinion polling, if you pay attention to it, you have to be very careful. People love to throw out public opinion poll data all the time, but you should ask them what is their sample, right? Because, for example, the NRA, I don't hate the NRA, but if the NRA publishes a study and says 90% of Americans believe in the right to bear arms, I would be suspicious. But then I would ask, who did you survey? And if they told me that they surveyed their members, right? That would be like surveying the ACLU about the immigration ban. It's biased, right? Because you're surveying their members. So the same way, what could be happening here is that, like, I just haven't got the populations I want to get yet. But I'm hoping that changes in Georgia. Now, here's what's going to blow your mind. If I did a survey of students at Lone Star College on Kingwood campus, right? What percentage do you think would identify as Christian? I don't know. First time I've ever been here. A lot. What percentage? What do you think? 60? 90?
Probably 80%.
80? Okay. So, and again, remember, I oversampled some groups in this, okay? But look how many students said that they had no religion. 21% said nothing. Like, when I say said nothing, it doesn't mean they didn't write anything. They wrote nothing/no religion. Plus 15% were agnostic. We had as many agnostics as Christians. Yeah, so all the stereotypes you've heard about California are all coming through, right? A godless heathen land, right? Yeah, so, and then I oversampled Muslim and Jewish students. We only have 500 Muslim students out of a campus of over 10,000 people, but I oversampled them because I wanted to get their perspectives on a few things. But this is still very surprising that a third of the students have either are atheist or agnostic. So there's a lot of stuff to kind of unpack there. 80% Democratic leaning, not surprised. And then, 75% were citizens by birth, okay? Which means the other 25% were either foreign naturalized citizens or not citizens, okay? Now, here's where we're starting with this project. So there's three things I'm looking at, right? How do we measure participation? How do we measure patriotism? And how do we measure discrimination? So let's start with participation. So the traditional way that people measure participation in surveys is to just ask things like, have you voted? Are you going to vote? Or they'll give people 2 or 3 candidates and say, which of the following candidates would you vote for in an election? I'm doing an experiment actually like that right now, where the only thing we changed with a candidate was their skin tone. 3 candidates, all with military experience in the Marine Corps, and the only thing we changed was one of them is white, one of them is, he's of like me, of Indian descent, and then one of them, it's the same guy, we just darkened his skin tone. Because there was a guy who ran for Congress who was in the Marines, who ran for Congress from Minnesota about 10 years ago, and he lost, and they alleged he lost because before the election, someone darkened his skin in an ad, and then ran it. And then people were like, oh no, skin color doesn't matter. You'd be horribly shocked. If you darken someone's skin tone, they're less likely to win often, or people will say they're less likely to vote for them. So we're doing an experiment right now, seeing how people evaluate candidates. It's the same candidate, same military experience, same qualifications, only thing different is skin tone. So that's sometimes people ask, would you vote for this candidate? But for this, I knew that participation is too limited, right? Just asking if you voted is not enough. So what I did was, I said, okay, where is it? In the survey, the following is a list of political activities. Regardless of your current citizenship, please check the activities you think are important to living in the United States and being involved in civic life, right? So this is unique. I'm giving people a list of activities and I want them to tell me which they think are important to be involved in civic life in the US. And also because I'm saying regardless of citizenship, because someone who's not a US citizen, they may not want to take part in the survey. So I think this is also interesting as well. And then later on what I'm going to do is, not today, but in my next step, is I'm going to unpack it and see, do non-citizens have one type of preference versus another, okay? So here's the interactive part. I'm going to start reading these off. I want you to raise your hand if you think that these are good activities for participation in civic life in America, okay? Voting for candidates, federal, local, state, okay? Most people, all right. Voting on referenda, propositions, initiatives. Do you guys know what these are? Ballot initiatives, right? You don't have them in Texas at all?
Sometimes, but not nearly as often as, say, California.
Yeah. Does anyone know what California had a ballot initiative on a few months ago that everyone is very happy with? No, not yet. Yeah, they decriminalized marijuana for people over the age of 21. So, of course, everyone's very happy. Now, perpetually, basically. And you can grow up to 6 marijuana plants in your own home. Anyway, it doesn't affect me, but... although we were just talking about this, what do you do when you have a student who comes in who's clearly blazed? Like, I can't do anything, I can't call anyone because it's he has the legal right, but he just can't focus. Literally, his eyes can't focus. So, okay, so voting, right? Participating in a rally or protest. How many people think this is a good form of civic thing? Okay, volunteering in your community. Volunteering on a political campaign, running for office, donating money to a candidate or party. You know, donating money is now considered a form of free speech based on a 2010 Supreme Court case, right? Joining an interest group or civic association. Donating money to an interest group. So 3 weeks ago, the ACLU raised $24 million in 48 hours because in response to the executive orders, which is 6 times what they raised in 1 year. They raised in 1 weekend. So a lot of people felt like, this is my political action. I'm donating to the ACLU. Signing a petition, including one online. Corresponding with your elected officials. Tweeting, calling. I hope you're not texting. That gets a little bit tricky. Writing letters, sending emails to newspapers, magazines, or websites about political issues. Now here's an interesting one. Boycotting. Abstaining from specific products or companies for political reasons. Okay? And now what do you think would be the opposite of a boycott?
Buying specifically from places.
Right, buying specifically. And I learned that this is called boycotting. I didn't even know. I learned it 2 or 3 months ago, right? Has anyone heard of any examples of boycotting or boycotting in the last few weeks? There's been a few in the US. Starbucks, right? What happened with Starbucks? What sparked the boycott/boycott?
The 10,000 refugees, right? They said they were going to hire them.
Yeah, so that started a boycott. So people are like, yeah, we love Starbucks. And then what happened?
And then like some people didn't agree with that, so they boycotted it.
Yeah, so isn't that fascinating? The same thing started two rival campaigns. One to boycott Starbucks and one to boycott Starbucks, right? What else has happened recently that people wanted to boycott? What? Chick-fil-A, yes, a few years ago. Chick-fil-A's politics really came to the forefront. I mean, it is a Christian-based company. It's the only national fast food chain closed on Sundays. I lived in Georgia. I mean, I knew all of this, whatever, but it became more of a national news because, you know, the politics of the company became more vocal, and people got very upset about it. I was actually surprised that Chick-fil-A has spread outside of Georgia. I thought after that, there's no way they would spread, but now it's in California, it's in Illinois. I don't know if you guys know who Aziz Ansari is, but he's got a really funny bit about this because he's like, because he's from South Carolina, right? So he's like, homophobic politics, really good chicken sandwich, right? Homophobic politics, I love that chicken sandwich, like that kind of turmoil that we all feel, I guess. What else has come up in the news as a boycott/boycott?
Star Wars.
What?
There's a lot of people who boycotted Star Wars because it was
Too diverse.
It was
something
pushing
like
a feminist agenda.
It had a black stormtrooper, God forbid.
that. Something like that.
But what about companies? Why? What did Target do? Okay, the bathrooms. What else?
Kellogg's.
I'm surprised nobody has said the big one, which is Uber. Right? Uber, staggering number of people deleted their Uber app 2 weeks ago because in response to the Uber CEO being on President Trump's economic advisory team, and then like a huge number of people deleted their Uber apps. Like I read one number 50,000, one number 100,000, more than that. And the Uber CEO stepped down from the economic team. So a lot of people consider that a win. The simultaneous boycott, though, was Lyft saying, we will donate $1 million to the ACLU to provide these things. So we had this kind of weirdness going on in America. Anyway, I found these very fascinating thing. Okay, so participation can be measured in different ways. So what I did was I asked students at UCSB how they thought about participation. And their results are this. A little bit hard to say. So voting for candidates, as you can tell, very strong. Volunteering community, very strong. And then it starts to drop away. So for example, signing a petition, 60%, boycotting, 55%, corresponding, not very high. Now, one thing I didn't ask you that I asked them was joining the military. And I'm curious, how many people think joining the military is something that is good for civic life? Nobody in this room. Interesting. Could someone want to tell me why they don't think joining the military is, I guess, civic engagement? I'm just curious. I just want some feedback on this. Nobody? But what about people who are non-combat positions?
Well, they're still in military.
Okay, forget about military. What about law enforcement? Serve and protect. So law enforcement is okay, but not military.
Well, I joined the military, but
Oh, you did?
yeah.
Okay, so you're a vet. Okay. Interesting.
Military, you're not able to speak out. I mean, you couldn't really dissent from the military, could you? I mean, a lot of those things you listed as civic engagement, you couldn't participate in if you were active military. It could limit your ability to participate in some of those things.
Yeah, like active duty can vote, right? But you can't put up campaign materials.
About something you don't agree with in the military.
Right, right.
That would be, I mean, you're kind of, it's limiting most of those things.
That's a good point.
You couldn't do that. I was in the military. You could disagree. You just couldn't do it in uniform.
Yeah, I think.
Well, there's stipulations on it. You're not as free as you would be otherwise, right?
No, you can still say what you want to say. You just can't have any affiliation with like your unit, your detachment.
Because wasn't there some story recently about some convoy of Hummers or some military trucks that had a Trump flag on the military convoy?
That was a state National Guard. They had sold those Hummers, and that they were privately owned.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. If it's privately owned, it's okay. But you know, every 4 years, every few years, this becomes an issue where this happened when Obama was president, where a bunch of people said they would refuse to follow an order if he was the president. And several people were dishonorably discharged from the military. It's already happened. There's at least 1 or 2 people who have said they would refuse to follow an order from President Trump, and they'll also probably be dishonorably discharged. So I know what you're coming from, and I understand where you're coming from as well, is that people may feel like they cannot participate as much if they're in the military. But as you said, there are stipulations. Okay, so let's move on to the next part, measuring discrimination, okay? Now, one of the difficulties with measuring discrimination is you can't just ask someone, have you experienced discrimination, right? I mean, yeah, you're saying yes, but the question is like, if I wanted to measure that though, if I ask someone, it may not get at the whole thing, right? Because the argument I'm making is that discrimination itself, like participation, means different things to different people. So David Williams, he's a professor, I think at the University of Pennsylvania. He came up with this thing called the Everyday Discrimination Scale, which that's what I'm using. So what I've done is that these are 9 questions with 6 possible answers each. And the answers are basically like this. So each question will say like, I'll show you the first one. You are treated with less courtesy than other people, right? So then what you would say on the scale is, if you've experienced this almost every day, at least once a week, a few times a month, a few times a year, less than once a year, or never, okay? And the argument then is that if there's 6 possible answers, 9 questions, so if you've never experienced discrimination, that's a 0, right? So then that means that if you score a 0 across the board, across 9 measures of discrimination, then you have never experienced discrimination in your life. Great. You are a unicorn, okay? On the other hand, if your score is a 54, that means that every day you experience 9 different types of discrimination. And then, you know, tear. Like, I feel bad, right? It makes me sad, okay? So what we did was I asked these 9 questions, or 9 statements. I'm just going to list them out. So you can see that if you want to ask someone if they felt discriminated, you need to do it kind of in this way, which is you are treated with less courtesy, less respect, you've received poorer service, people act as if they think you are not smart, people act as if they think you are dishonest, people act as if they're better than you, you're called names, you're threatened or harassed. So as you can tell, right, I'm really trying to unpack what discrimination means. Does this make sense? Right, and as you can tell, hopefully people also agree with me that this is actually seems pretty legit, like at a way to get rid of it. Now, I want to be clear about something that came up at another campus. I am asking about individual experiences with discrimination, right? I'm not asking about group experiences with discrimination. And the reason why that matters is because there's a tendency sometimes in a lot of survey research to ask questions like, do you feel, like, so they'll ask African American respondents, do you feel that African Americans are discriminated against in the United States on a scale? Or they'll ask, I don't know, LGBT, do you feel that lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgendered are discriminated? Or on a group level, right? But the problem with those questions is that I'm interested in at the individual level because participation is often an individual act, right? I mean, taking part in a protest is a group of people, but it's a group of people because each person has wanted to participate and hold up some cool sign, okay? By the way, I think regardless of your political agenda, I think the best sign I saw at a protest was someone with a sign that says, my favorite show used to be Orange is the New Black. But Trump, Orange, right? Yeah, okay, all right, yeah. I thought that was a good one. Apparently I'm the only one, so. Okay, did anyone here take part in a protest in the last few weeks? Yeah?
Well, not in the last few weeks, but like in November.
In November, okay. In January, how was that?
It was very interesting.
Was the one in DC?
No, I went to the one in Houston.
Okay.
I actually went to the one in New York City, like the same day that like Trump got in office.
So November 8th.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Okay.
forgot the date, but it was really cool. It was super, like there was like 20,000 people.
That's good. I'm glad that you guys are taking part in these things. Okay, now here's what I did was I took all this data just to show you, and because I wanted to see, so what does a normal distribution on a graph mean? If I told you that I was expecting to see a normal distribution, those of you who have taken economics, psychology, political science, anything with a graph, what is a normal distribution? So no. But it is kind of an up and down. It's just what we call like the bell curve in some ways. Like it goes up and it comes down, right? And that is what I expected to see, but I didn't quite see that. And again, remember, my sample is only 91 students. This will probably change when I get more data. But here's what I actually found. I found that 1% or so of the people said that they experienced, only 1% said every day, And then there was about 12% who said they never experienced discrimination, ever. Now, that could also be a function of my campus. UC Santa Barbara is 90 miles north of Los Angeles. It's in a pretty affluent area. 40% of the undergrads come from families that make $200,000 a year. So if you grow up with money and you grow up with privilege, you kind of and it happens, I'm sure, in Houston too, you can isolate yourself from people who don't think like you. Right? I think we all know this is the truth. When you have a certain amount of money, you can live in some place where people are like you, and you can keep people out, right? So that's interesting. And then, as you can tell, it goes up. So about 5% at least once a week, about an 18% a few times a month, 42% say a few times a year they experience one of these types of discrimination, less than once a year, and then never. And I'm sure everyone in this room has had some very moving experience with discrimination of some kind. The question, though, is that my argument is that if you experience discrimination often, especially daily or weekly, that over time, no matter how steadfast you can be about America, how patriotic you are, how much you love America, that chips away. And then that chipping away is what leads to people less likely to want to get involved in politics. Okay, I mean, I've experienced just yesterday, I don't know if it was discrimination or it was like a microaggression, but like you guys know what a microaggression is? Who knows what one is? Okay, what would be the example? Ask me a microaggression.
Say something in Indian.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Say something in Indian, right? Where are you from? Oh, you speak English really good. You don't have an accent. I guess it's you speak English really well. You don't have an accent, right? Those would be microaggressions, right? Or I could ask you, I mean, again, and this is just an example. This is not really like, where's your NRA sticker? Right? Like, or just something like, oh, where's your KKK hoodie? Right? That's a microaggression. I'm presuming that you belong to the KKK because you're white. I don't know anything about you, but that's the same thing. Don't take this personal. You're a very, very friendly student volunteer here. You should get extra credit just for me letting me do that. But the same thing, because just so yesterday, okay, I'm on the plane. I'm sitting in the emergency exit row. I'm just sprawled out because I got all this leg room, working on this presentation, right? A woman next to me looks over and she's like, oh, interesting. I'm like, yeah, this dissertation or whatever. And she's like, have you heard about this new airline? It's called Immigrants. And I looked at her, I'm like, what? I was like, and then she's like, yeah, I just kept seeing the ads on TV, and Jennifer Aniston is in them, and it looks so friendly. And I'm like, ma'am, that's Emirates. Right? And she was like, immigrants, same difference. And I was like, so again, part of me was thinking she was just being dumb, but a lot of my friends who I posted this on Facebook were like, I think she recognized that you're like brown and you're doing this and whatever. So, immigrants. Fly immigrants. Hashtag Bowling Green Massacre, right? Okay, yeah. It's not real. All right, okay, so I had to throw that out there. Okay. What is it? Alternative news? Alternative facts. Alternative facts, okay. By the way, regardless of your political ideologies, you guys have to watch, if you haven't seen it, Melissa McCarthy on SNL. It's pretty funny, so I think. All right. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. And I think this is like the last part of the presentation is talking about how do we measure patriotism. And I think especially that we're in Houston, especially in Texas, I think this is going to resonate with a lot of you, and I would love to get your feedback on how we measure patriotism. So, there's a famous article, you can look it up on Google Scholar if you're familiar with it, by Huddy and Khatib, Leona Huddy and Nadia Khatib. They did this project about 10 years ago at Stony Brook University, which is in New York. And they wanted to look at kind of what I'm asking as well, which is what is the link between patriotism and participation? It was kind of one of the ideas for my project, but they looked at it in a very narrow way, right? They looked at participation as, did you vote in like the 2004 election? And then they asked them questions about the war in Iraq to see if they had political knowledge, okay? And I thought that was too narrow, so that's kind of how this project came about. But what they did was they came up with 16 of what we call agreement statements. So here's what I mean by an agreement statement. I don't know if any of you have taken this on a survey or seen this. So it'll ask you something like, do you like, okay, the statement will be, I love pudding, right? And 0 is, I completely disagree, and a 10 is, I completely agree. And you mark where you are on the scale. So if you agree with the statement, so it's not asking you, do you like pudding? Do you agree with the statement, I like pudding? Right? It's a little bit different, right? And then you mark where you are on that scale, okay? I personally don't like pudding, and my distaste of pudding has increased after the whole Bill Cosby thing. I don't know if you know this. Those of you who are very young, you won't get this, but Cosby was like the national spokesperson for Jell-O pudding for like my entire childhood. So I can't, they're just cognitive dissonance now, really, at this point. So, okay, so what happens is that if we take 16 statements with possible scores of 0 to 10, we have a patriotism score. So if you score 160 on a patriotism index, you are like, I bleed red, white, and like one of those, like and there are people like that. This morning when I gave the presentation, this Navy veteran was like, I'd get a score of 200. I'm like, but the scale is only out of 160. He's like, I'd get a 200. I'm like, yes, you are the definition of like the ultimate patriot. Great, okay? And then if you score a 0, life is probably not very happy right now either, okay? I don't mean to keep looking at you. You're just kind of in my line of sight. I'm sure your patriotism score is more than a 0. Right, okay. All right, so here's the way they did it. They gave 16 statements. I'm not going to list them all out, but what they did was they grouped the statements. So they grouped them by topic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the questions that were asked, or the statements. And then, again, this is with my small sample at UCSB. What so far have been the mean averages, right? I mean, mean is like average, right? What has been the mean score for some of these statements? Because some of you might be very surprised and maybe not, okay? So, for example, national identity. I see myself as a typical American. The mean is 5.89. All right, so that means the average thing is a 6 on that scale of 1 to 10, okay? And I wonder, does anyone here in this room say they would be a 10 out of 10? I see myself as a typical American. Interesting. Unless you guys are afraid of raising your hands.
Well,
because
what is a typical American?
That's a good question. What makes someone a typical American? And that's something that's not provided in the statement, right? So maybe, as you said, actually this is a good point. Maybe the low score is because people are not sure how to answer it, okay? Which is, again, why after I get all this data, I'm going to do interviews. Because the only way to really get to know people is to sit around with a table and ask them questions, right? Okay, so I see myself as a typical American. And then we have the second one, symbolic patriotism. It makes me feel good to hear the American national anthem. Again, mean is 5.45. Now, Jay brought up something in the car when we were driving over here that I had not really thought about, which is that a lot of these statements that we're asking, this is also right a few weeks after we've just inaugurated a very unpopular president. This is at the time when, 10 years ago when they did the survey, or 12 years ago when they did the survey during the Gulf War, Iraq War, Afghanistan War, there was no talk about people kneeling during the national anthem. But this post-Colin Kaepernick effect has created a situation where people are now talking about it more and thinking about it more, and you hear more and more about people not participating in the national anthem, right? So perhaps this is an effect of that. 6 months from now, a year from now, maybe these scores would be higher. I don't know, right? Does anyone feel like they would be a 10 out of 10 on this?
I'm just kind of curious, so like, obviously I watch sports.
Yeah.
I sat here at the national anthem.
Right.
Somebody who doesn't go to sporting events, has no interest in sports, in the average day, when would they hear the national anthem?
I think it's not just about sporting events. It's just like,
I'm saying like how,
right, you're right.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you have no experience with it on a daily basis, wouldn't that kind of skew your score towards like a lower end of it? Do you know what I mean? If you didn't hear it on a daily or weekly
But
basis?
at the same token, okay, that's a very good point. And I think I was telling someone that these talks today have been good because I'm getting a lot of feedback. But I think the argument here is that I'm not asking people the frequency with which they hear it, right? Just so I'm saying is that even you watch a lot of sports, and let's say I don't, right? So I don't hear the national anthem that often, but I know the national anthem and I know it well. So should it matter how the frequency with which I hear it?
But when would you hear it if you didn't watch sports? what's an event that you would hear it at, or an
That's a good-
occasion you would hear it at?
That's a really good point. That's one.
Okay, so once a year, I guess that's.
Yeah, that's a good question. Where, if I didn't watch sports or I didn't participate in sports, where would you hear the national anthem?
You have the Olympic hysteria every
4 years.
2 years, the winner.
A winner, yeah.
But
That's a really good point, actually. So you think there's actually kind of like some effect there that people just
Well,
don't.
I have a degree in political science, so these questions make me cringe in general.
Yeah.
But like something like that, like honestly, it's just that question to me would be a throwaway question because, you know what I mean? Especially if you're dealing more with refugees or people that aren't as ingrained in necessarily even our sports culture.
Right.
So, I don't know.
That's actually a really good point.
I'm curious as to what the
Yeah,
exposure would
because
be.
outside of sports, you're really only hearing it at patriotic events, 4th of July, maybe some political event where the goal is, well, the political event would really be unity, like around a candidate, around an interest.
Yeah, but I've been to political events too where no one is singing the national anthem. This is really good. I think this is a really good point, actually, is that the exposure to the national anthem may just be low, right? I think, let me just say also the background. The reason why I included a question like this is because I'm looking at college students. So college students have just finished high school. So a lot of people have still kind of got that high school, not all college students have just finished high school, but a lot of them have that, they've just finished. So they went to a high school often where maybe the national anthem every day, some schools, they have to sing it or they have to participate in it. They may be around more sporting events because of it. But I agree with you. Maybe this is something I should take out of the survey because I can remove the question if I feel like the results are biased. So I appreciate that. You're the first person who's actually brought this up. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Interesting point about this. I was just telling some students at another campus that when I was in India, I got into a little bit of, I don't say hot water, but some antagonism because I went to see a movie, and last year the Indian government passed a law. So at the beginning of every movie, in a privately owned movie theater, they play the national anthem and everyone has to stand. At a movie theater, okay? So they want to encourage people to participate, right? Now this is something you would never probably see in the US, but, okay, so I go to a movie, I'm not standing for the national anthem, people are yelling at me in Tamil like, why aren't you standing, you have to get up, and I said, I'm not an Indian citizen. Why should I participate in the Indian national anthem? They're like, no, whatever, and I actually pulled up the law, I just looked it up, because I'm a nerd, I pulled it up on my phone, it says this is for Indian nationals. And so I didn't stand, people were yelling at me, it was just this awkward kind of moment. So here's the corollary to that, right? If you went to a sporting event and you didn't see someone stand, and you asked them and they said they were not a US citizen, is it okay? Is it okay for a non-US citizen to not stand during the national anthem?
I know some people who would say no
Why?
because they have,
And there's no right or wrong answer, I'm just,
because they kind of have I'm talking about people I know, not me personally, but they have kind of a really embedded patriotism that if you're living in this country, then you should respect. They see the national anthem is standing for as kind of like a respect for military and people who have served and who died to protect the freedoms of this country. I personally see it at the national anthem as like saying, yeah, the country's pretty great, but I don't personally see it as like a salute to the military, whereas other people would. And in my experience, those people who see it in that way and see like the Pledge of Allegiance and the American flag as a representation of people who have died to protect this country and its rights, they tend to be more patriotic and tend to have that kind of point of view.
and I think that's why a lot of people would be opposed. But again, I would kind of, my devil's advocate argument on that would be, you said people living in this country, what if I'm visiting from Brazil? Just for the weekend, and someone was like, hey, do you want to go check out this game? Like, but I see where you're coming from. I think the counter argument people would be like, would you stand for the national anthem in their country? So why should they stand for yours?
Me personally, no, I would.
No, your friends, right? What do you think about that, right? It's just something to think about, right? What does it mean? Because I'm not trying to devalue the Star Spangled Banner. I'm not trying to do any of that. But what does it mean to stand for the national anthem? You know, maybe this question actually, instead of saying it makes me feel good to hear it, maybe something about the national, because I can change these questions, like the national anthem, I don't know, hearing the national anthem makes me feel more American. Something like that. Maybe there's a different way to write this question. Okay, so I got to think about that. Okay. The next type is what we call constructive patriotism. This got a very high mean, right? So people should work hard to move this country in a positive direction. Okay? So people should work hard to move this country in a positive direction. Now you could argue, and again, I didn't come up with these statements, I took them from someone else, but you could argue that this question is a little bit leading because it implies hard work. So then therefore someone is likely to be like, people should work hard. Yeah, you know, of course, hard work. I want to push this country forward. At the first campus I spoke to this morning, University Park, people were actually unhappy that that was that low. People were like, why wasn't it 10 out of 10? And I said, because there are people who don't want to work for anything in the US. I mean, this has been a running commentary all day, but I know a guy in Atlanta who's lived in the US for 30 years. He refuses to take US citizenship. And some of you actually might know someone like that as well who refuses. They've been in the US, they pay taxes, their kids go to school here, but they just will not take citizenship. And part of that is maybe because they feel like if they take US citizenship, they're turning their back on the country of origin. That's a possibility. This guy doesn't want to do it. Why do you think this guy doesn't want to take US citizenship? It's not because of turning his back. He doesn't want to get sign up for jury duty. So he's never registered to vote, right? Yeah. Don't look at me like judging me. I'm just telling you it's like someone I know, okay? Yeah, okay. And then the last one, well, here we go. The last one is what we call uncritical patriotism. So, and I can see why the mean is low now, but like, I support my country's leaders even if I disagree with their actions. Again, I'm collecting data at a very contentious moment in American history. So who knows, 6 months from now, a year from now, maybe different findings, right? Maybe 2 years from now, different findings, hard to say. But I think that kind of speaks to the time that we're at. But again, this argument, right, and this ties into something which I would love to get your feedback on, which is, what does it mean to be a patriot and dissent, right? What does it mean to be a patriot and dissent? Because again, I would argue that one of the things that we have right now in the US is this belief that if you are truly an American patriot, whatever that means, then you have to support America no matter what. But I think the counter argument to that, if any one of you have read American history or the work of Jefferson or Madison or Hamilton, is there was a legit belief that dissent and disagreement with the government was itself an American virtue. Right? Have any of you heard of the Federalist Papers or read them? I mean, this is basically 85 letters to the editor, right? That John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison wrote over a 2-year period to newspapers in New York, and they were so afraid of getting blowback, they wrote under a fake name, okay? Letters to the editor about why they supported the Constitution. But there was a counter to that some of you may not have heard about. There's actually a collection of anti-federalist writings, right? Jefferson was an anti-federalist, and these are kind of explaining why they disagreed with the Federalist arguments, and some of them are very powerful as well. But again, there was a mutual respect, right, even if they disagreed, and there was a belief that how you showed patriotism and how all that had a different meaning for them. But I think what I've realized today, doing all these talks and all that, is that this seems to be the stumbling block we have in America now, which is we cannot have a political disagreement without throwing grenades. Okay? So I'm going to end on this part to say a few things. First of all, this is just a snippet of what I'm doing. I do expect that as I get more responses from immigrants and refugees, or even students who identify as minorities, I will get more experiences with discrimination. But I still hypothesize that immigrant and refugee college students are going to be affected differently by patriotism. And then I guess the next part of my project is trying to figure out why that is, right? And I think part of that goes back to what I said earlier about political socialization. If you've grown up in a certain culture, even if you come to the US at the age of 1, right? A lot of the kids who grow up overseas, when they come to the US, their parents bring their politics with them. It's called transnationalism. So in some ways, even though you're an American living in the US, you grow up with the politics of your country of origin. And that never goes away, right? And the reason why all of this matters, and this is where I'll end, is just to say that it's not, and this goes back to my first piece, right? I think we need to change the debate about participation. It's not that American students don't participate, it's just that they participate differently. And I think if we recognize that students participate differently, then we won't, I mean, voting is important, but I think students need to be encouraged to take part in multiple forms, especially people who are not citizens, right? If you're not a US citizen, if you've not registered to vote, if you're not over the age of 18, and if you don't have a felony, and in some states, if you have a felony, you lose voting rights for life. In some states, it's for like 10 years, whatever. If you meet all those if you don't meet those requirements, then how do you participate? Well, most of the things I shared with you, you could participate still. You can't obviously run for office, that would be difficult, but you can do other things. So I think we just need to think about this more deeply. So thank you for your time.